Rustbrook. Chapter 1. The graves were still being dug when Silas arrived. Not new ones. The same ones from yesterday, deepened now, the earth turned dark and wet from overnight rain. A man at the far end of the row drove his shovel in with the rhythm of someone who had stopped thinking about what was at the bottom of the hole. A woman knelt at the nearest mound, pressing a wooden cross into the soft ground with both hands, leaning her weight into it like she was trying to make it permanent. Silas counted the rows. Then he counted them again. The birds had not come back. He noticed it the way you notice a sound that stops, not immediately, but in the absence of it, in the way the silence had a shape it shouldn't. The tree line to the east stood dark and still. No movement. No sound. The kind of quiet that didn't come from peace but from everything that lived in those trees deciding, at once, to hold very still. Fraction X had stopped. That was the word people were using. Stopped. Pulled back. As if they'd been beaten. He knew better. A force that can take a village and chooses not to isn't showing mercy. It's sending a message. And the message, written in ash and turned earth and the faces of the dead, was simple: whenever we want. Next time, they would not stop. He made himself look at all of it. That was the least he owed them. To look, to count, to carry the number somewhere inside him where it would not fade. Rustbrook had not died. He had to remind himself of this. The village still moved, still breathed, children carrying water toward the last smoldering places, women patching split timber with whatever scraps came to hand, men at the edge of the square grinding blades against stones with the slow focus of people who needed something to do with their hands. Nobody spoke much. The war had simply exhaled, the way a fire exhales when the wind changes, and everyone here understood that the next breath was already being drawn. The woman crossing toward him had her boots pulling slightly in the damp soil and her face stripped clean of everything but the essential. Grief hardened overnight into something functional, something that could be aimed. Marla. The blacksmith's daughter. Her hands were balled at her sides. Behind her, without her looking at it, one of the fresh mounds bore a cross he recognized. Jace. Her brother. "We need to be ready," she said, "when they come back. Because they will." He looked at her. He took in the flatness in her dark eyes, not emptiness but the opposite, too much pressed down. She was not speaking for herself. She was speaking for the mound behind her, for every mound in every row. "We will be," he said. The lie came out clean. That was the worst part. He'd told it so many times now that it no longer stumbled on its way out. He had no idea if it was true. Beneath the plans and contingencies he carried the image of Fraction X pulling back, organized, unhurried, deliberate, and the understanding that they had not retreated. They had simply chosen, this once, not to finish it. They walked through the square together. Past the half-collapsed buildings and the scorched earth. Past a boy no older than 12 fashioning something crude and bladed with fingers that should not yet know how to do that. The boy did not look up. Marla stopped near the caved-in barn. "What's our next move?" Silas looked out over the ruin. Rustbrook was standing. Just. The defenses had held long enough to matter and not long enough to mean anything. "We rebuild," he said. "And we prepare." He was about to say something else when the scout came at a dead run from the eastern road, boots throwing mud, chest heaving, one hand raised to get Silas's attention before he'd even slowed down. Silas felt his stomach drop before the man said a word. "Tracks," the scout said, bent double and breathing hard. "Fresh ones. Half a mile out, maybe less. A dozen riders at least. They came in close last night and pulled back before dawn." The square went quiet around them. Not the working quiet of before. The held breath quiet of people who have just understood something. Silas looked at Marla. Her jaw was tight, her eyes on the tree line now. They weren't retreating, Silas said. It was barely above a murmur. They were watching. He put the thought somewhere below his breathing and turned. The town hall smelled of paper and ash and the sweat of men who had not slept. A lantern pushed light across a table covered in maps, Thomas's charcoal battle markings cutting thick dark lines across the worn parchment. Thomas himself was bent over it when Silas entered, 2 fingers tracing something, his jaw working the way it did when he was thinking through a problem he didn't like the shape of. Across from him, Elder Miriam sat with her hands folded and her eyes closed. The door creaked. They both looked up. "We need a plan," Silas said. He moved to the table. He looked at where they'd been hit hardest: the food stores, the water supply, the eastern approach where the first wave had broken through before anyone was ready. Thomas pushed a map toward him. "They know where it hurts," he said. "And they'll hit it again." Miriam opened her eyes. The grey of them was the grey of old stone, the kind that has seen enough not to be surprised. "We protect what's left," she said. "Because next time there won't be much left." Silas traced his finger along the map. He stopped at the blind spots, the undefended approaches, the places where the line had bent and almost broken. "We fortify here," he said. "Double the night watch. Lookouts on the hills." Thomas leaned back. "That's a start. It won't feed us. We're running low on everything. Another week like this and we don't have a village to defend. Then we send teams out," Silas said. "Nearby settlements. Trade what we have. If anyone's still willing." Miriam dipped her head. "Hardship changes people, Silas. Including the ones who were once friends." He met her gaze. He knew the truth in it the way you know the temperature of water before you put your hand in, through accumulated experience of being wrong before. Hunger made men into thieves. Fear made them worse. "But we try," he said. "Or we wait here and starve." Thomas exhaled sharply. "And if they kill the teams before they make it back?" The silence after that did not ask to be filled. Miriam gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I'll reach out to the Council of Elders. They may hear me where they wouldn't hear others." "That might keep us alive," Silas said. "Thank you." She offered a faint smile, not of hope, but of understanding. The distinction mattered. Thomas grabbed a scrap of parchment and began writing. "We need to think past survival," he said. "Rebuilding the walls isn't enough. We need food that grows in hard ground. Water that doesn't depend on what we've already got." "Agreed," Silas said. "The artisans. The herbalists. Anyone with knowledge we haven't used yet." Miriam reached across and placed her hand on Silas's arm. Light. Firm. The touch of someone who has learned when to anchor people. "Our strength is in unity," she said quietly. "If fear divides us, we don't survive the next wave no matter how high we build the walls." Silas looked down at the map. At the lines and marks and the spaces between them where things had gone wrong. "We stand together," he said. "Or we don't stand at all." Thomas gave a final nod. "The kind that means no more deliberating. Then we start now." They stepped out of the town hall into the full weight of what Rustbrook had become. It hit Silas every time, the way the village had transformed from a place where people lived into a place where people survived, the gap between those two things visible in every scorched wall, every patched fence, every face moving through the wreckage with the expression of someone who has stopped expecting things to get better and started focusing only on what can be kept from getting worse. The argument started near the water supply. By the time Silas made sense of it, a man had already stepped forward from the gathering crowd, work-worn hands, face lined deep with exhaustion, fury burning clean and hot in his eyes. "This is all his fault," the man said. His voice cracked on the last word but did not break. "Every grave out there is on him." A woman beside him nodded hard. "We were safe before he came. He brought this to our door." Silas stopped walking. He felt the words the way you feel a blade, not the pain yet, just the cold, and the knowledge of what comes next. He had known this moment was coming. He had felt it building in the silences, in the looks, in the way certain people stepped aside when he passed. This was worse than the graves. The graves were finished. This would follow him. The man stepped closer. His knuckles were raw from work or grief or something with no clean outlet. "Why should we trust you now?" His voice carried the specific anger of someone who has lost something they cannot get back. "What do you have to say for yourself?" "I understand your anger," Silas said. He kept his voice even. "It cost him something to do it. I didn't bring this war here. It was already coming. How convenient." The woman's voice was thick with skepticism, her arms locked across her chest. "You're just saving your own skin. Thomas stepped forward. He bled for this place, he said, with the flatness of a man choosing words carefully. Same as the rest of us. You think turning on each other saves anyone? Miriam's presence shifted the temperature of the crowd, the way authority does when it's earned rather than assumed. Blaming each other won't rebuild our homes, she said. It won't fill our food stores. It won't stop the next attack. The man exhaled. The rage still there but uncertain now, unsure of its footing. Silas took a single step forward. Nobody moved back, but nobody moved forward either. I'm here because Rustbrook still stands a chance, he said. But only if we stand together. Otherwise we don't stand at all. He let the silence do its work. Then the crowd began to disperse, slowly, the way crowds do when the energy that held them together loses its charge. Silas watched them go. Trust wasn't gone. It was broken. And broken things didn't come back the same. But they could come back functional. That would have to be enough, because it was all there was. Behind him, from somewhere near the eastern barricade, one of the night watchmen called out, low and controlled, the voice of a man who had been trained not to shout and was fighting that training right now. Movement on the ridge. Silas turned. The tree line stood dark against the last of the light. And there, high on the ridge beyond it, a flicker. A reflection. There and gone in less than a second, the way firelight catches glass, the way a lens catches the sun. Someone up there had just watched the crowd turn on Silas. And they had wanted him to know it. The jail was dim and cold, the torchlight moving in a draft from somewhere he couldn't locate, shadows on the stone walls shifting and settling and shifting again. The air smelled of damp earth and something older. Blood. Maybe. Not all of it recent. Orianthe sat on the bench with her wrists bound and ankles shackled and her entire posture arranged in the precise attitude of a woman who has decided that captivity is a minor inconvenience. She was studying the ceiling when Silas entered. She did not look down immediately. Why did you come to Rustbrook? His voice was low. Steady. He'd learned that steadiness was more threatening than volume in rooms like this. Orianthe's eyes dropped from the ceiling to his face. Her lips curved, not a smile exactly, but the expression of someone watching a familiar play performed by actors who don't know they've seen it before. I was curious about your supplies, she said. And how quickly you'd lose them. Curious. He did not move toward her. He let the word sit there. You were seen mapping our defenses. She gave a slow, fluid shrug, uncannily graceful for a woman in chains. I like knowing things. It keeps people alive. Thomas, from the wall, if you're working with the raiders, now's the time to say so. Flat. Cold. Because it won't stay a conversation. Orianthe's gaze moved to him, a brief assessment, a categorization, then back to Silas. I have no loyalty to those savages, she said. That doesn't mean I'm on your side. Then tell us what you know. She did not answer. Instead, she let her eyes travel slowly around the room, taking inventory. Silas felt the shift before he understood it, the subtle reversal of who was conducting this interrogation and who was being studied. You think this place holds out against another attack? Her tone was light, almost curious. Like someone asking about the weather. It will, Silas said, if we know what's coming. A soft exhale that might have been a laugh. Knowledge is power. She tilted her head. Isn't it? Thomas stepped forward. Enough. Do you know when they'll strike? Orianthe leaned forward slowly, her chains shifting with a low metallic sound. She looked at Thomas for a long moment, and something changed in her face, the playfulness going quiet, replaced by something sharper, something with edges. I might know, she said. The room tightened. Not from anything she'd done. Just from those 3 words and the weight behind them. Silas exchanged a glance with Thomas. Then looked back at her and understood, with the stomach-dropping clarity that comes too late, that he had been asking the wrong questions since he walked in. She had not been waiting to answer. She had been waiting for him to realize this. Then tell us, he said. He already knew how it sounded. He said it anyway. The silence stretched. She let it. They have plans, she said finally. Her voice had gone quieter. Less mocking. More dangerous. Big ones. Silas did not flinch. What kind of plans? Orianthy's gaze settled on his face, and in it he saw something he could not name, the certainty of someone who already knows where a conversation ends before it begins. Plans, she said, that erase Rustbrook. A pause, precise as a surgeon's. And you? She held his gaze and did not look away. And Silas stood there in the shifting torchlight and felt the cold of it, not fear exactly, but the particular chill that comes from understanding you are not the most informed person in the room, and that this has been true since before you walked in. He needed to think. Which meant he was already behind. And Orianthy sat in her chains and watched him arrive at this conclusion, and she did not smile, because she did not need to. She had already won this part. Silas went back to her cell that night. He told himself it was strategy. He needed information and she had it, and that was the only reason he was standing in the dark outside an iron door at an hour when every sensible person in Rustbrook was either asleep or on watch. He pushed the door open anyway. Orianthy was awake. He had expected that. She was sitting with her back against the stone wall and her knees drawn up, and she looked at him the way you look at something you have been expecting for a while and are mildly disappointed has finally arrived. "You lasted longer than I thought," she said. Silas pulled the door shut behind him. He did not sit. Standing gave him nothing, but he was not ready to give up the small advantage of height. "I want to know what you meant," he said. "About predictability." She studied him for a moment. The torchlight from the corridor barely reached her, and in the half-dark her expression was difficult to read. "That was probably deliberate." "You really want to know," she said. "Or you want me to tell you you're doing fine?" He said nothing. She nodded slowly, as if he'd answered. She unfolded from the wall and sat forward, elbows on her knees, and looked at him with the focused attention of someone about to explain something they have explained before to people who did not listen. "Fraction X doesn't fight the way you fight," she said. "You defend. You fortify. You react. You look at a gap in your wall and you fill it." She paused. "They look at the same gap and they ask who put it there. Who decided it was a gap? Who will be watching it when they come? And then they don't come through the gap at all. They come through the place you forgot to look because you were so busy watching the gap." Silas felt something shift in his chest. Not surprise. More like the particular discomfort of hearing something you already knew stated plainly by someone who shouldn't know you well enough to say it. "You're telling me we're already losing," he said. "I'm telling you you've been losing since before the attack," she said. "The attack was just them showing you the bill." He moved to the far wall and stood with his back against it, arms crossed. He needed to think, and he couldn't think with her watching him directly. That was the problem with her. "So what would you do?" he said. "If it were you?" She was quiet for long enough that he looked up. "I wouldn't defend a fixed position against a force that doesn't need to take it," she said. "I'd make them uncertain. I'd make them spend time trying to understand me instead of predicting me." She tilted her head slightly. "The moment they can predict your next move, you've already lost the fight. You're just waiting for them to confirm it." Silas thought about the ridge. The lens flash. The deliberate visibility of it. Someone up there had wanted him to know he was being watched. Which meant they were confident enough in what they saw not to bother hiding. "How long have they been watching us?" he said. Her expression didn't change. "Long enough." 2 words. And in the space of them he understood that the answer was longer than he wanted it to be. He pushed off the wall. "If I let you out," he said. Not a question. A thought spoken aloud to see how it sounded. Orianthy looked at him steadily. "You'd be making a decision you can't take back," she said. "And you'd be doing it because you're out of better options." She paused. "Which means you're closer to understanding your situation than you were an hour ago." It wasn't reassurance. She wasn't offering reassurance. She was simply observing that he had arrived at a particular place in his thinking. Silas stood in the dim cell and looked at the woman in chains and felt the full weight of what Rustbrook was up against. Not just Fraction X, not just the hunger and the broken walls and the villagers who had turned on him that afternoon, but this. The possibility that the only person in Rustbrook who genuinely understood the enemy was sitting in a jail cell because he had put her there. That letting her out might save them. That letting her out might also be exactly what someone had planned for him to do. He didn't know which. That was the problem. He turned toward the door. "I'll think about it," he said. Behind him, Orianthe settled back against the wall. He heard the soft shift of chains, the quiet of someone entirely comfortable with waiting. "You do that," she said. He stepped into the corridor and pulled the door shut and stood there in the cold dark, listening to the silence of the village, the distant footsteps of the watch, the low creak of the new barricade settling, the wind moving through the places where walls used to be. Somewhere beyond the tree line, patient men were doing the same thing. Waiting. And unlike Silas, they already knew how this part ended. The caravan arrived at midday. Silas heard it before he saw it, the groan of axles, the dull percussion of hooves on dry ground, the particular kind of noise that meant either salvation or another problem. He was at the gate when they came through, Thomas at his left shoulder, Elder Miriam at his right. The three of them watched in silence as the caravan rolled in and the villagers slowed their work and stared, because people who have been hit once always watch arrivals with their hands close to something solid. The man who dismounted first was broad across the shoulders with a jagged scar that ran from his left cheekbone down toward his jaw. He moved like a man who had learned to enter rooms, and villages, and conversations, in a way that established terms before anything was said. He looked at the walls, the towers, the people. He was doing arithmetic. "Name's Garrick." He offered his hand. "Heard you could use help." Silas took it. The grip was firm without being a test. "Silas. Welcome to Rustbrook." Garrick's eyes moved over the barricades, the patched sections, the places where the timber was still raw from recent work. "Looks like you've been busy," he said. "No choice," Thomas said. "The raiders forced our hand. They'll force it again." Garrick nodded. That was all, a single nod that said, "I know, I've seen it, let's talk about what it costs." And there it was. The thing Silas had felt the moment the man dismounted. Garrick hadn't come because he believed in Rustbrook. He'd come because Rustbrook had something to offer or because being here served a purpose Silas didn't fully understand yet. The help was real. The math behind it was something else. "We're grateful for your support," Silas said. Garrick gave a slight smile. The kind that acknowledged the word grateful without being moved by it. "We'll see how grateful," he said, "once you see what we brought." The supplies came down from the carts slowly. Elder Miriam moved to the center of the square and began directing their distribution with the quiet authority of someone who had been managing scarcity long enough to do it without anger. "Make sure every family gets what they need," she said. "No hoarding. No wasting. We don't get a second chance at this." Silas watched the crates come off the wagons and felt the familiar grinding calculation. How many people, how many days, how many attacks before the numbers stopped working? The supplies were real and they were not enough, and everyone doing the arithmetic already knew it. Nobody said so. There was no point in saying so. Garrick appeared beside him. "It's a start," Garrick said. Silas looked at him. "A start," he agreed. "What do you want for it?" Silas said. Garrick was quiet for a moment. He watched one of his men helping stack timber near the south barricade. "When Fraction X comes back," he said, "and they will, I want my people positioned where it matters. Not on the perimeter. Inside." Silas held his gaze. "You want a seat at the defense. I want to make sure what I brought here doesn't get wasted by decisions made by people who don't know how to make them," Garrick said. "No offense." "Some taken," Silas said. Garrick nodded again. That same brief economy of movement. "Then we understand each other." They did. That was the thing about transactional men, they were easier to trust than believers, in some ways. You always knew exactly where you stood. The second group arrived before the first had finished unloading. Silas was at the south wall when the shout came from the gate, and by the time he got there a line of people was already filing through, survivors by the look of them, soldiers by the way they moved, with that particular economy of motion that came from having been in enough situations where wasted movement got you killed. A tall woman separated from the group and walked toward him without hesitation, the way people walk when they have already decided the terms of the conversation. "Calla," she said. "We're here to help. Whether you trust us or not." Silas looked at her. She was already looking past him, at the walls, the towers, the angles of approach, the places where the defense had obvious gaps. She was reading Rustbrook the way Orianthe had read his interrogation, and the assessment in her eyes was not warm. "We'll take it," he said. Behind her an older man stepped forward, tool belt at his hip, hands that had the roughness of someone who had spent years fixing things that were already breaking. "Harland. Engineering." His eyes moved over the barricades with the expression of a man cataloguing problems. "You needed this yesterday," he said. "More than you know," Silas said. Harland turned to his engineers without another word, and they fanned out immediately, testing, measuring, pressing their hands against the timber to feel how it flexed, crouching to examine the foundations of the watchtowers. They moved like people for whom everything was already a problem to be solved rather than a question to be asked. Calla unrolled a map against the nearest wall and pointed. "Here," she said. "Here and here. Your weak points. They'll hit these first because they're obvious and because an obvious weak point draws defenders away from the places that aren't obvious." Silas leaned in. She spoke like the outcome was already decided and the only question was whether they'd be ready for it. "How soon can we start?" he said. Harland called over from 30 feet away without looking up from whatever he was examining. "We're already behind," he said. They always were. The confrontation happened an hour later, near the supply carts. Silas heard the voice before he understood the words, sharp, stripped of anything but anger, the voice of a man who had been holding something in and had stopped being able to hold it. "Don't touch that." He turned. One of Harland's engineers stood frozen beside a supply cart. A villager had him by the collar. Not large, the villager wasn't large, but his hands were certain and his face had the particular expression of a man who had decided that this, right here, was the line. "That's ours," the villager said. "You don't walk in here and start taking what's left." The engineer didn't pull away. Didn't react. Which was either training or wisdom, and in this moment made no difference because the effect was the same. It made the villager feel unheard, and unheard men escalated. "We're reinforcing your walls," the engineer said. "That means we use what we need." "You weren't here," the villager said. His voice dropped in a way that was worse than shouting. "You weren't here when we buried them." The engineer's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "I wasn't." A silence. Then, "You think you're the first place we've seen like this?" The shove came fast. Not vicious, not the shove of a man trying to start something, but not nothing either. The shove of a man who had run out of words. Weapons shifted. Hands moved. Too many people standing too close together with too little sleep and too much loss between them. Silas stepped in. Enough. Not loud. But it cut. Nobody moved. He looked at the cart. Then at the crowd that had formed around it without anyone deciding to form it. People drawn to friction the way they were always drawn to friction in places where tension had nowhere else to go. "This is how we lose," he said. "Not to Fraction X. To this. Right here." The villager's grip loosened. Not because he was convinced. Because the words landed in a place that was tired of being angry and the tiredness won, just this once. The crowd thinned. The work resumed. Silas stood where he was for a moment, watching, and felt the particular exhaustion of a man fighting two wars simultaneously and not certain he was winning either one. That evening Silas spread the maps across the table in the town hall and looked at them for a long time without speaking. Thomas stood opposite. Harland sat at the far end, one hand wrapped around a tin cup, the other tracing something on a scrap of parchment. Calla leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, watching Silas the way she watched everything, like she was waiting for the gap to show itself. Harland spoke first. "There's an outpost," he said. "Old military site. Half a day south, maybe less." He set the tin cup down. "I've heard it from 3 different people now. Pre-collapse installation, mostly underground. If the rumors are right, it's still intact." Thomas looked up. "You really think it's still there?" Harland shrugged. "We keep patching holes. We die slower." He looked at Silas. "We need something real. Something that changes the equation. Not another layer of timber on a wall that's already been hit twice." Calla pushed off the wall. "What kind of tech?" "Power," Harland said. "Surveillance." Defense systems if we're lucky. He paused. If it still works. Elder Miriam sat with her hands folded in the particular way she had when she was thinking through consequences rather than possibilities. If it's real, she said, it changes everything. Or ends it faster, Kala said. The room was quiet for a moment, with the specific quality of quiet that settles over people who have just agreed to do something dangerous without saying so out loud. Silas looked at the map. He traced the route south, the terrain, the exposure, the places where a small team could be seen from a long way off. He thought about Orianthi's voice in the dark. The moment they can predict your next move, you've already lost the fight. He thought about what it would mean to find that outpost and what it would mean not to. Small team, he said. Fast. Quiet. He looked at Kala. You're going. She nodded. I'll bring 2 engineers. We'll need them if there's anything worth taking. Silas looked toward the door. And Trapper. Thomas raised an eyebrow slightly. Trapper's still not sold on any of this. That's why, Silas said. He sees it work, he comes around. And we need him to come around before the next attack, not after. Miriam looked at him steadily. Be careful, she said. We can't afford to lose people. Not now. Silas nodded. He looked at the map a moment longer, then rolled it up. He found Trapper at the edge of the village near the eastern wall, sharpening a blade by firelight with the focused patience of a man who trusted tools more than people. Silas sat down on the ground nearby without being invited and watched the fire for a moment before speaking. There's an outpost, he said. Military. Half a day out. Trapper kept working the blade. And? If it's what we think, it changes what we're able to do. What we're able to survive. Silas paused. We need someone who knows the terrain. Someone who can get us in and out before we draw attention. The blade caught the firelight. You in, Silas said. Trapper was quiet for long enough that it wasn't silence anymore. It was a decision being made. Then he set the blade across his knee and looked at Silas directly for the first time. Fine, he said. But I'm watching them. Silas stood. Fair enough. He walked back toward the village, and behind him the fire crackled and Trapper went back to his blade, and the night settled over Rustbrook like something that had been waiting to fall. Somewhere in the jail, Orianthi sat in her chains and listened to the village prepare for something it didn't fully understand yet. And somewhere beyond the tree line, the watching continued. It always did. Chapter 3. They left before dawn. 6 of them. Silas, Trapper, Kala, 2 of Harlan's engineers, a quiet woman named Pell who carried her tools like weapons, and a younger man called Davin who had the kind of stillness that either meant exceptional competence or exceptional fear, and you didn't find out which until something went wrong. And a villager named Cause. Cause had asked to come. That was the thing Silas would think about later. He had asked. Volunteered. Stood in the dim light of the town hall the previous evening while the mission was being organized and said he knew the terrain south of the village, had trapped and hunted that ground for 15 years, knew where the water was and where the ground went soft and where a man could walk for an hour without leaving a print. Said he wanted to be useful. Said he was tired of patching walls and watching other people do the things that actually mattered. Silas had looked at him. Cause was not young, somewhere in his late 40s, lean and weathered in the way of men who had spent their lives outside. Not a fighter. Not trained for anything like this. But he knew the ground and they needed someone who knew the ground, and Trapper couldn't be everywhere at once. He'd said yes. He thought about that in the grey pre-dawn as they moved south through the tree line, Trapper at the point and Cause just behind him, the man's movements quiet and certain in his own terrain. He thought, this was a reasonable decision. He thought, Cause is capable and the mission needs what he has. He thought, I hope that's why I said yes and not because it was easier than saying no to a man who wanted to matter. He didn't let himself answer that. The ground south of Rustbrook changed within the first hour. The forest thinned and the soil went from dark loam to something grittier and pale, the trees giving way to scrub and broken stone, the remains of something that might once have been a road running through it like an old scar. Trapper moved them off it immediately, pushing them into the brush on the eastern side where the going was harder but the visibility worked in their favor. Nobody spoke. The silence had a texture to it after a while, each member of the team settling into their own particular version of alertness. Silas watched Cause. The man moved well. Better than well, he had the easy confidence of someone reading the land the way others read a room, adjusting his line without thinking, placing his feet on ground that would hold without looking down to check. 15 years of this territory. It showed. Silas looked forward again and kept moving. They reached the outpost at mid-morning. It was not what he had expected, which meant it was exactly what he should have expected. Half swallowed by the earth, the original structure reduced to a suggestion of itself above ground while below, through a rusted hatch that Trapper found under 2 feet of scrub and dead vegetation, something else entirely waited. The hatch was heavy. It moved. They went down in single file, Trapper first, then Silas, then Calla, then Pell and Davin, then Cause pulling the hatch shut above them with a sound like a held breath released. Inside, the air was cold and stale and carried the particular quality of spaces that have been sealed for a long time, not dead exactly, but suspended. The emergency lighting still worked, barely, casting everything in a dim amber that made the shadows absolute. Metal shelving along the walls. Crates. Equipment under canvas. The suggestion of systems that had once run on power that might still be there. Pell had a light. She moved it slowly across the shelving and made a sound low in her throat that was not quite satisfaction. Calla was already at the far end of the room, hands on a control panel, not touching it yet. Reading it. "Give me a moment," she said. Trapper positioned himself near the hatch, facing it, rifle across his knees. Davin moved to the eastern wall and began cataloguing what was on the shelves with the methodical focus of someone who had been told to do exactly this and intended to do it correctly. Cause stood near the center of the room and looked around with the expression of a man who has walked into something larger than what he was promised. Not afraid. Just recalibrating. Silas moved to Calla. "What do you see?" he said quietly. She was tracing connections on the panel with one finger, not touching, just following. "This is still live," she said. "Partially. There's power coming from somewhere, backup cells maybe, something that's been bleeding out for years but hasn't gone yet." She paused. "If Harland were here, he could tell us how long it's got. Can you access it?" "Maybe." She looked at him. "Give me time." They had been there perhaps 40 minutes when Davin found the cache. Behind a false panel in the eastern wall, radio equipment, weapon components, ammunition sealed in crates that had kept the moisture out, a set of handheld devices whose function Pell identified immediately and confirmed with the particular brevity of someone who does not believe in celebrating things until you are somewhere safe enough to celebrate them. Silas looked at the cache and felt the flicker of something he no longer entirely trusted. Hope, or the shape of it. The thing that preceded bad decisions if you let it. "Load what you can carry," he said. "We move in 20 minutes. It was Cause who found the power cell. He had drifted to the far corner of the room while the others worked, the way people drift when they are trying to be useful without getting in the way of people who know what they're doing. He was moving a collapsed shelf section when he uncovered it, a unit the size of a large crate, partially cracked along one face, humming faintly with something that was either residual charge or the last complaint of a system giving out. "Silas," Cause said. Quietly. Without urgency. Silas crossed the room. He looked at the unit. He looked at the crack in its casing. Pell was already there, crouching, her light close to the damaged face. She was very still in the way that meant she was thinking fast. "It's live," she said. "The cracks in the outer casing only. The cell itself looks intact." But she stopped. "But," Silas said. "But if that casing fails the rest of the way while we're moving it," she looked up at him, "it doesn't just stop working." "How bad?" She held his gaze. "Bad enough that we don't finish the trip home." Silas looked at the cell. He looked at the crack. He thought about what Harland had said, "We need something real, something that changes the equation." He thought about Rustbrook's walls and fraction excess patience and the arithmetic of delay that was the only math available to them right now. He thought about what a functional power cell meant. Alarm systems. Floodlights. The ability to see what was coming before it arrived. The difference, possibly, between holding and not holding. He looked at Cause. Cause was watching him. Not the cell, him. The man had understood the shape of the conversation from the moment Pell went quiet. "I can carry it," Cause said. Silas said nothing. "I know how to move careful," Cause said. "Done it with snares, with glass traps, with things you don't want going off in your hands. His voice was steady. It was the voice of a man making a reasonable case and knowing it was reasonable and knowing also that it wasn't really his decision. Silas looked at the crack in the casing. He looked at the distance from here to the surface, from the surface to the tree line, from the tree line to Rustbrook. Half a day. More if they were being careful. Uneven ground in places. A man carrying something unstable with both hands, unable to catch himself if he stumbled. He ran the calculation. The cell was worth the risk to the mission. The cell was probably worth the risk to the team. The cell was probably not worth the risk to one specific man carrying it alone, unsupported, on ground that went soft in places and rocky in others. He looked at cause. He thought, this man volunteered. He thought, he knows the ground better than anyone. He thought, if Pell or Davin carry it and something goes wrong, we lose an engineer and we can't replace that. He thought, cause is not essential to anything beyond this mission. He knew, the moment he thought it, that this was the calculation he would carry home regardless of what happened. Not the decision. The fact that he had made it that way. All right, he said. You carry it. Pell stays within arm's reach the entire time. You stop when she says stop. You set it down when she says set it down. You don't argue and you don't decide anything on your own. Cause nodded once. Understood. They moved out 6 minutes later. The trip back was long. Trapper set a careful pace, slower than the journey in, reading the ground ahead before committing to it. Cause moved near the center of the formation, both hands on the cell, his breathing controlled and deliberate. Pell walked beside him, her eyes on the casing, one hand occasionally reaching out to check the surface temperature without being asked. Silas walked behind them both. He watched Cause's feet. The way they found the ground. The small adjustments, the brief pauses when the terrain changed, the absolute concentration of a man who had reduced his entire world to the object in his hands and the ground beneath his feet. 15 years of this territory. Moving through it like it was his. He was good at this. That was the worst part, Silas thought. Not that he had sent someone unprepared into something dangerous. He had sent someone entirely prepared into something dangerous, which meant the risk was real and chosen and not the result of miscalculation. Just calculation. They were 2 hours out from Rustbrook when Cause's foot found the soft ground. It happened in a second and Silas saw it happen, the slight forward shift of weight, the ground giving 6 inches where it should have held, Cause's knee dropping, his arms compensating automatically the way a body does before the mind has finished processing the fall. The cell tilted. Pell's hand was already there. She had it. Both hands, low, taking the weight without jerking, her body dropping smoothly to absorb the movement. They held the position for a long moment, Cause on one knee, Pell crouched beside him, the cell between them at an angle, perfectly still. Nobody breathed. Then Pell said, quietly, I've got it. Slow. They righted it together. Cause got his feet back under him. He looked at his hands for a moment, then at Silas. Silas looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. They kept moving. They came through Rustbrook's gate in the late afternoon, the light going copper and long across the village, and the people who saw them come in stopped what they were doing and watched with the particular attention of people who have learned to read arrivals. Harland was at the gate. His eyes went to the cell immediately. Is that what I think it is? He said. Silas said yes. Harland looked at the crack in the casing and his expression moved through several things quickly. Then he looked at Cause, who was still carrying it, and nodded once in the way of a man acknowledging something he understood without being told. Bring it to the workshop, Harland said. Carefully. Cause followed him without looking back. Silas stood at the gate and watched them go and felt the weight of the afternoon settling into his shoulders, the specific heaviness of a man who has gotten what he went for and knows exactly what it cost and knows also that the cost was reasonable by any measure he could apply to it. That was the thing about reasonable costs. They didn't get lighter for being reasonable. Thomas appeared at his shoulder. You get it? All of it? Yes, Silas said. Good. Thomas paused. Everyone back. Everyone back, Silas said. He said it the way it was true. Everyone had come back. The cell was in Harland's hands. The mission was a success by every measure that missions were measured by. He did not say, "I sent a man to carry something that could have killed him and I made that decision in about 30 seconds and I knew when I made it that I was making it because he was the most expendable person in the room." He did not say it because it wasn't Thomas's problem. Because there was nothing to be done about it now. Because cause had come back and the cell was intact and Rustbrook was marginally less likely to die tonight than it had been this morning. He said, "Get Harland started on the integration as soon as the cell is stable. We don't know how much time we have." Thomas nodded and moved off. Silas stayed at the gate a moment longer, looking out at the road they had come in on, the dust still settling from their passage. The tree line beyond it dark and still. No birds. He turned back toward the village and went to find out what came next. The dust came first. Silas was on the watchtower when he saw it, a pale line rising above the tree line to the east, thickening as he watched, the kind of dust that meant weight and numbers and something that was not going to stop because you asked it to. He had seen dust like that before. He had learned to read it the way sailors read water. He did not need to count. The dust told him enough. "Calla," he said. His voice came out level. He was grateful for that. "Get everyone into position." Below him the village erupted into the specific controlled chaos of people who have been told what to do and are afraid and are doing it anyway. Thomas moving along the wall barking positions. Harland's team at the alarm systems, checking connections, hands quick and certain. Elder Miriam in the square below directing the last of the civilians toward the sheltered areas with the calm authority of someone who understood that panic was more dangerous than whatever was coming. Trapper appeared on the wall beside him without announcement. "How long?" Trapper said. 20 minutes, Silas said. "Maybe less." Trapper looked at the dust. Then at the walls. Then at the people taking their positions along them, weapons up, faces set in the expressions of people trying to look like they knew what they were doing. He said nothing. That was its own kind of answer. They came out of the tree line at a hard pace, the riders in front and the siege equipment behind, and for a moment, just a moment, Silas felt something he had not expected to feel. They were ready for this. The traps were set. The walls were reinforced. The positions were right. Harland's alarm system had given them 4 minutes of warning, which was 4 minutes more than they'd had last time. The archers were placed where Calla had said to place them. The oil was positioned where Calla had said to position it. Trapper had the eastern flank and Thomas had the gate, and everyone was where they were supposed to be. "Fire," he said. The first volley went out clean. For 20 minutes Rustbrook was winning. Not easily, nothing about it was easy, but the traps were doing what they were built to do, the archers were finding gaps, and the wall was holding in the places it needed to hold. Fraction XS first wave broke against the eastern barricade and pulled back and came again and pulled back again, and each time they pulled back Silas felt the rhythm of it, the pattern, the shape of what was happening, and the pattern said, "We can do this." The battering ram came on the third wave. He had expected it. They had prepared for it. Calla's oil went down on schedule and the fire caught and the operators screamed and some of them fell back and the ram slowed. Not stopped. Slowed. Thomas held the gate. Silas moved along the wall, making decisions in the spaces between seconds. Archers here, reserves there, the breach in the northwest corner that Harland was already moving to seal. Then the gate buckled. Not broke, buckled. The difference was 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Thomas had his shoulder against it and 6 men behind him and they were holding it and they could not hold it. "Silas," Thomas shouted. His voice was not panic. It was information. Silas was already moving. He came off the wall at the northwest stair and hit the ground running and reached the gate as the next impact came through it. Felt it in his feet, in his jaw, in the base of his skull, and put his weight against it beside Thomas and the 6 men and felt the whole thing shudder against him like something alive. "Hold," he said. They held. The ram hit again. They held. The ram hit again and this time the timber cracked along a line 3 feet above the ground, a sound like a gunshot, and the crack widened and light came through it and Silas looked at the light and thought, "We held as long as we could." Then Harland's charges went off. 3 of them, placed exactly where Harland had said he would place them, and the effect was immediate and violent. The ram's operators scattered, the approach collapsed under 2 of them, and the ram itself lurched sideways and stopped. Not destroyed. Stopped. 20 seconds. Thomas looked at Silas through the smoke and dust with the expression of a man who has just been given a gift he doesn't entirely believe in. Reinforce it, Silas said. Now. They reinforced it. That was when Garrett came through the eastern breach. Not the gate. Not the approaches they had planned for. The eastern breach, the section of wall that had held through the first 3 waves and had been quietly, incrementally, deliberately weakened by each of them, and which gave way now with a sound that was less dramatic than it should have been for what it meant. Silas heard the shout from the wall. He turned and saw the gap and saw the men coming through it and saw, at the center of them, the figure that moved differently from all the others. Not faster. Not louder. Just differently. With a particular quality of movement that said, I know where I'm going and I've already accounted for everything between me and it. Garrett. He was exactly what the dust had implied. Broad, dark-armored, twin blades carried with the ease of long familiarity. He moved through Rustbrook's defenders the way water moves through a gap, not forcing, just finding the line of least resistance and following it, and the line led directly toward the center of the village and the man standing in it. Silas understood. He was the objective. Not the village. Him. Take the breach, he said to Thomas, who was already moving. Then he went to meet Garrett. They came together in the middle of the square with the particular economy of 2 men who understood each other's intentions completely. The first exchange was fast and told him everything he needed to know. Garrett was not better than him. Garrett was exactly as good as him, which was worse than being better, because it meant this ended on something other than skill. It ended on endurance or luck or the small accumulated costs of everything that had happened in the last hour catching up with one of them before the other. Garrett knew it too. They circled. You fought well today, Garrett said. His breathing was controlled. He was not giving Silas information, he was taking it, watching how he responded to being spoken to in the middle of a fight. Silas didn't respond. He watched Garrett's hands. The wall held longer than I expected, Garrett said. He feinted left and Silas didn't move for it. That's yours, I assume. The planning. Silas struck. Garrett parried and countered and Silas took the counter on his forearm instead of his shoulder, which was the right choice but cost him his angle. They reset. How many did you lose today? Garrett said. Too many, Silas said. The first words he had spoken. Garrett nodded slightly, as if this confirmed something. Same, he said. And in those 4 words Silas understood that Garrett was not indifferent to cost. He counted it the same way Silas counted it, carried it the same way, made the same calculations and lived inside the same arithmetic. The difference was that Garrett had decided the arithmetic justified what he was doing. Silas had not decided that yet about himself. He drove forward, hard, fast, 3 strikes in sequence designed to create a commitment, and Garrett met all 3 and the third one nearly connected, close enough that Garrett stepped back half a pace, and for a moment Silas had the angle and the pressure and the next 30 seconds mapped out in his head and thought, I have him. That was when the sound came. He heard it before he felt it, a low mechanical thrum that had no place in the noise of battle, underneath everything, wrong in the way the silence had been wrong that morning with the birds. He felt it in his sternum. In his back teeth. Garrett stopped. Silas stopped. Around them, without coordination, without order, both sides stopped. Not because anyone told them to. Because something in the sound reached past training and fear and adrenaline and touched something older. The mech came out of the tree line at the northern edge of the village. It was not like the one from before. Larger. Moving with a purpose that the last one had lacked. Not wandering, not reacting, but directed. Its weapon systems were already active, the targeting arrays cycling with a particular mechanical patience of something that did not need to hurry because it already knew where everything was. It fired. The first beam took out the northwest watchtower. Not the wall beneath it, not the approach, the tower specifically, the highest point, the place with the best sightlines. It was not random. It knew what it was targeting. Fraction X broke first. Silas watched it happen, the formation dissolving, men running for the tree line, the discipline of the last hour gone in 10 seconds. Garrett was shouting, trying to hold them, and some of them held and most of them didn't. Rustbrook's defenders broke a few seconds later. Move. He was shouting too, moving, grabbing people by the arms and pointing them toward cover. Get off the walls. Get down. The mech fired again. The eastern barricade, the one they had held all afternoon, the one that Thomas had bled for, came apart in a single second, and the noise of it was enormous and wrong in the specific way of things that were not supposed to be possible. Silas found cover behind the remains of the supply cart near the center of the square and looked across it at Garrett, who had found cover behind the fountain 6 feet away. They looked at each other. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. Two men who had been trying to kill each other 30 seconds ago were now crouching behind rubble waiting for the same thing to stop killing everything around them. The mech moved through the village with systematic thoroughness. It did not pursue individuals. It targeted structures, the watchtowers, the barricades, the reinforced sections of wall that represented the accumulated work of the last several weeks. It was not trying to kill them. It was trying to undo what they had built. Then it stopped. Just stopped. In the center of the village, in the space that had been the training square that morning, surrounded by the wreckage of both armies. Its targeting arrays cycled down. Its weapons went quiet. It stood there for a long moment like something considering. Then it turned and walked back into the tree line. Gone. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Silas had ever heard. He stood up slowly from behind the supply cart. Around him, on both sides, people were doing the same, rising from cover, looking at each other, looking at the damage, looking at the space where the mech had been. Fraction XS remaining forces were already pulling back. Not rooting, pulling back. Organized, which was somehow more frightening than panic would have been. Garrett was with them, moving toward the tree line, and he paused once and looked back across the ruined square at Silas. He nodded once. Silas did not nod back. He watched them go, and then he turned and looked at what was left of Rustbrook and began the accounting. Wall sections down. Towers gone. The eastern barricade reduced to timber and ash. Harlan's alarm system destroyed in the first 5 minutes of the mecha's arrival. Everything they had built in the last 2 weeks. Gone. Thomas appeared at his shoulder, bleeding from a cut above his eye that he wasn't paying attention to. We held, he said. Silas looked at him. We're alive, Thomas said. The village is standing. Silas looked out at the ruins of the defenses, the groaning wounded, the fires still burning in 3 places, the faces of the people who had fought and survived and were now standing in the wreckage of the thing they had built, trying to understand what had just happened to it. He thought about the moment he had thought, I have him. He thought about what it cost to be winning and then not be winning and then survive anyway, which was its own kind of loss because it meant you had to start again, and you knew this time exactly how much starting again cost. We're alive, he agreed. He did not say, and it will come back. He did not need to. Everyone standing in that square already knew. He turned to find Harlan. They had work to do. Chapter 6. He walked the village at first light. Not to assess. He told himself it was to assess, damage, priorities, what could be salvaged and what couldn't, but that was the word he used to make the walking feel like work rather than what it actually was, which was a man moving through the wreckage of something he had built and failed to protect, needing to see all of it before he could begin to think about what came next. The fires had burned down to coals overnight. The smoke still moved through the streets in slow pale ribbons, catching the early light, and beneath it the village had the quality of a place that had been stopped mid-sentence. A bucket on its side near the well, water long gone. A blade in the dirt at the edge of the square, no one's hand on it anymore. The eastern barricade reduced to a black scar along the ground where the timber had burned down to nothing. Silas walked through all of it. He counted without meaning to. It was a habit he had never been able to stop, the automatic inventory of a man who had learned that not counting was how you ended up surprised by the size of what you'd lost. 43 people in the sheltered areas when he'd checked at dawn. 11 wounded seriously enough to matter. 3 who wouldn't see the week out regardless of what Miriam's people did for them. 212, the last count before the battle. He did not finish that calculation. He had done it 3 times already, and the number at the end of it was the same each time, and doing it a 4th time would not change it. He found it near the remains of the northwest watchtower. He almost walked past it. It was half buried under a fallen beam, just a corner of it visible, and what made him stop was not recognition exactly but something underneath recognition, a quality of the thing, the color of it, the particular wear pattern on the edge that he had seen before without filing away, the way you see things every day without storing them and then one day the absence of them tells you that you had been storing them all along. He moved the beam. It was heavier than it looked and his shoulders were wrong from the fighting and it took him longer than it should have. He got it clear. A child's boot. Small. Leather, badly worn at the toe, a repair along the left side done with a particular crude stitching of someone who knew how to make something last rather than how to make it look good. He had seen this boot. He knew exactly where he had seen it, on the foot of a boy who had been carrying water buckets through the square 2 days ago, back and forth, too small for the buckets but doing it anyway without being asked. He did not know the boy's name. He stood there with the boot in his hands and felt something give way in his chest that he had been holding in place through will and necessity since before the battle and probably since before that, since the cemetery, since Marla's brother's cross, since the unnamed grave at the end of the last row. He stood there alone in the smoke and the ruined light and let it happen, because there was no one watching and nothing required of him in this specific moment, and the boot was small and the stitching was crude and someone had repaired it carefully because they wanted it to last. He set it down on top of the beam. Carefully. Upright. He stood there a moment longer. Then he kept walking. Miriam found him at the southern wall, or he found her, he was not entirely sure which. She was standing with her back to the damage, looking toward the center of the village, and her face had the expression it got when she had already done the accounting and was now simply living inside the result of it. How many? He said. She told him. He nodded. The number settled into him alongside the others. We'll rebuild, he said. The words came out before he had decided to say them, the automatic response, the thing you said because there was nothing else to say and silence was worse. Miriam looked at him. Not unkindly. Just directly. The way she looked at things she had decided to see clearly. Silas, she said. Rebuilding the walls won't be enough this time. He knew that. He had known it since the mech walked back into the tree line with the deliberate patience of something that would be back. Since he had watched it dismantle in minutes what had taken weeks to build, targeting the specific structures that mattered, working with a precision that had nothing random in it. I know, he said. She waited. He reached into his jacket and took out the piece of mech plating he had picked up yesterday, warm still, inexplicably, as if something inside it had not finished whatever it had been doing. He turned it in his hands. The metal was unlike anything Harlan's engineers had worked with. Different alloy, different construction, different weight distribution. Old. Older than the war. Older, possibly, than anything else in this wasteland. The mechs are the key, he said. Not the walls. Not the supplies. If we can understand them, control them, we change what's possible. Miriam looked at the plating in his hands. And if you can't control them? Then we die slower, he said. But we die the same way. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need? He thought about Orianthe in her cell. He thought about the facility south of the village, the underground installation, the things Harlan had said about pre-collapse technology still live and functional. He thought about the power cell sitting in Harlan's workshop, partially cracked, humming with something that hadn't run out yet. He thought about cores carrying it home with both hands, moving careful over ground that went soft in places. I need Harlan, he said. And Kala. And Orianthe. Miriam's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. That's a decision you can't walk back, she said. He looked at the plating in his hands. I know. She nodded once, slowly, the nod of someone accepting a thing they cannot change. I'll get them together, she said. When? Now, he said. We've already lost enough time. She moved off toward the village and he stood at the southern wall and looked out at the tree line and thought about patience. About men who were willing to wait. About the difference between a force that attacked and a force that waited, and how you fought something that understood both. He thought about Garrett's nod across the ruined square. One capable man acknowledging another. Same arithmetic. Different sides. He thought, the only way to change the arithmetic is to change what's available to count. The mech plating was warm in his hands. He closed his fingers around it and turned back toward the village. Whatever came next was going to be decided by who moved first. By who understood the mechs and what they were and what they could do before the other side finished understanding it. Rustbrook had nothing left to lose by moving. That was the only advantage a destroyed place had over an intact one. He went to find Harland. Chapter 7. They left in the dark, an hour before dawn. 5 of them. Silas, Trapper, Calla, Harland, and Orianthe. The last of these walking without chains for the first time since Rustbrook had put her in them, her wrists free, moving through the pre-dawn quiet of the village with the unhurried ease of someone returning to a natural state. 2 of Trapper's scouts had her flanked without being obvious about it. She did not acknowledge them. She did not need to. Silas watched her from behind as they moved through the gate. The tree line swallowed them before the first light came. Trapper ran the movement the way he ran everything, without announcement, without explanation, the decisions made and communicated through hand signals and pace changes that the others had learned to read over the last week. He pushed them south and east, off the direct route, adding 40 minutes to the journey in exchange for cover and sight lines that worked in their favor. Orianthe kept pace without effort. She moved through the terrain the way she moved through rooms, reading it, adjusting, never wasting anything. Silas noticed that she looked at certain landmarks, a split rock formation, a dry creek bed, the remains of a pre-collapsed structure barely visible through the scrub, with the brief focused attention of someone checking things against a map they were carrying internally. He did not say anything about it. The facility entrance was where Harland's information said it would be, a hatch set into a hillside, concealed under decades of growth, invisible unless you knew the shape of what you were looking for. Trapper found it in under 10 minutes. That was the first thing. Silas filed it away and said nothing. Below ground the air was cold and still and carried the particular quality of preserved spaces, not dead, suspended. The emergency lighting threw everything in amber, the shadows absolute at the edges. Harland moved his light slowly along the walls and made the sounds of a man revising his expectations upward. Calla went directly to the first control panel she found. She studied it without touching it, her face close to the screen, reading. Orianthe stood in the center of the first room and looked around. Silas watched her do it. She was still, her eyes moving in a pattern that was not the pattern of someone seeing a place for the first time. It was the pattern of someone confirming that a place was as they remembered it. Checking for changes. Taking inventory of what had shifted and what hadn't. She caught him watching. Neither of them spoke. They moved deeper. Harland catalogued as they went, his voice low and continuous, a running notation of what he was seeing and what it meant. Power systems, structural integrity, the age and condition of the equipment. Calla worked the panels they passed, each one yielding faster than the last, as if the facility systems were recognizing something in the approach even if they couldn't recognize the people. The control module was in the third room, behind a security door that should have required credentials none of them had. The door was already open. Not broken. Not forced. Open, the way a door is open when someone has unlocked it recently and not yet pulled it shut. Trapper stopped. His rifle came up without him deciding to raise it. Pure reflex, the body knowing before the mind caught up. He looked at Silas. Silas looked at the door. He looked at Orianthe. She was looking at the door too, and her face was doing what faces did when they were being held carefully still, which meant something underneath it was not still at all. "Someone's been here," Trapper said. His voice was barely sound. "Recently," Calla said. She was crouching near the door frame, looking at the ground. "The dust is disturbed. Days ago, maybe less." They stood in the amber light and nobody moved for a moment. Then Silas said, quietly, "We came for the module. We get the module and we leave. Fast." Nobody argued. The module was there. Exactly where the schematics said it would be, in the center of the room on a mount that had been designed for access, positioned as if someone had recently checked it was still in place and then left it for whoever came next. Harland went straight to it, his hands moving with the focused efficiency of a man who had been thinking about this specific object for days. He checked the connections, checked the power state, checked the interface points. "It's intact," he said. "Fully functional." "Good," Silas said. "Take it." It was while Harland was disconnecting the module that it happened. Orianthe had moved to the far wall, ostensibly to check a secondary panel, and Silas had let her because the scouts were positioned and he could see her from where he stood. She was running her fingers along the panel's edge, not operating it, just touching it, and then she stopped. Her hand went still against the metal. She stood like that for 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough that Calla noticed and looked at Silas. Long enough that it was not nothing. Then Orianthy's hand came away from the panel and she turned back toward the room and her face was composed again, entirely, the way it always was. But those 3 seconds. Silas had seen her face in the moment before the composure came back. In his cell by torchlight, in the training square, in every conversation they had ever had, she had never looked like that. Not once. He did not know what she had seen or felt or understood in those 3 seconds with her hand on that panel. He did not know what was on the other side of the door that she had been holding closed. He knew that whatever it was real. That for 3 seconds Orianthy had been somewhere other than here, and where she had been was somewhere that cost her something to remember. He filed it. He said nothing. They had a module to move. The turrets found them in the 4th corridor. 2 of them, dropping from ceiling mounts with the mechanical patience of systems that had been waiting a very long time for exactly this, their targeting arrays cycling to active in the second before they fired. Silas was already moving, shoving Harland left, dropping right, the first burst tearing through the space where they had been standing. Cover, Trapper said, which was unnecessary because everyone was already behind it. The corridor was narrow and the angles were bad and the turrets had the geometry of the space entirely figured out. Silas pressed against the wall and looked at Calla across 6 feet of open corridor that neither of them could cross without dying. Calla looked back at him. Then past him. Orianthy was already moving. Not toward cover, toward the panel on the near wall, the one Silas had clocked as a control interface and dismissed because there was no time. She moved in the way she moved in the training square, fluid and economical, using the wall for cover in the half-second between bursts, reaching the panel in 2 movements that should not have worked and did. Her hands on the keys. Fast. Too fast for someone working from first principles. The turrets fired again. Harland made a sound, hit or near miss, Silas couldn't tell. Calla had her weapon up and was drawing fire, burning ammunition they couldn't spare, buying seconds. Orianthy's fingers stopped moving. The turrets went silent. The corridor filled with the particular quality of quiet that followed violence. Not peaceful, just suspended, the systems recalibrating, the dust still moving through the amber light. Everyone stayed where they were for a moment. Then Harland said, his voice tight, "I'm all right." Caught my arm. "It's fine." Silas looked at Orianthy. She had already stepped back from the panel, her hands at her sides, her face arranged back into its usual expression. She met his gaze. "Good work," he said. She nodded once and said nothing. He looked at the panel she had used. The interface, the sequence she had entered, the speed at which she had entered it. "Military tech isn't too different from what I've seen before," she had said, weeks ago in her cell. He thought about those 3 seconds with her hand on the wall in the module room. He thought, there is a version of this where military training explains everything she knows. He did not believe that version. He picked it up and carried it and kept moving. They came out of the tunnels 40 minutes later, through a hatch that Orianthy found without consulting Harland's schematics, in a location that was not on Harland's schematics. Silas noticed. He did not say anything. The morning was grey and cold and the tree line stood dark around them as they moved north toward Rustbrook. Harland had the module. Calla had the data she'd pulled from the secondary panels. The mission had everything it had gone in to get, plus Harland's arm wrapped in a strip of Calla's sleeve, plus one member of the team who was moving slightly wrong in a way that suggested the near miss had been closer than he'd said. Silas moved beside Orianthy for the last hour of the journey. They walked in silence for a long time. Then he said, without looking at her, the door was already open. She said nothing. "The hatch you found coming out," he said. "It wasn't on any map we had." Still nothing. He looked at her. She was watching the tree line, her face neutral, her pace unchanged. "You've been here before," he said. Not a question. Orianthy walked for 3 more steps before she answered. "A long time ago," she said. Her voice was level. It was not the voice of someone confessing. It was the voice of someone deciding how much of a true thing to say. Before or after the collapse, Silas said. She looked at him then. Just briefly. And in her eyes he saw the same thing he had seen in those 3 seconds in the module room. Something real, something that cost something, there and then gone. After, she said. He held her gaze. That's not a small thing, he said. No, she agreed. It isn't. She looked away. He looked away. They kept walking. He thought about everything she had known. The facility layout. The panel sequences. The turret shut down. The hatch that wasn't on any map. He thought about the door that was already open and what it meant that it was open and who might have opened it and whether the answer to that question was the same person who had let a reconnaissance team walk into a pre-collapse weapons facility and find exactly what they were looking for. He thought about Orianthy's words from weeks ago, in the dark of her cell. The moment they can predict your next move, you've already lost the fight. He thought, what if that applies to me? What if this, all of this, the mission, the module, the clean extraction, the door already open, what if this was not Rustbrook winning? What if this was someone letting them think they had won? Rustbrook came into view through the trees, the gate open, figures moving inside. Home. Such as it was. Such as it remained. Silas walked through the gate with the module under Harlan's arm and the data in Caller's hands and a question in his chest that had not been there when they left. Not a question. Exactly. A certainty he didn't yet have the shape of. He went to find Thomas. Rustbrook. Act I, Chapter 8. The war room smelled the same as it always did, paper and ash and the particular staleness of a space where difficult decisions had been made too many times. Silas stood at the table and looked at the people around it and thought about how different this room had felt 3 weeks ago, when the maps were new and the plans were theoretical and nobody in it had yet learned the specific weight of being wrong. Thomas.
Calla.
Harland, his arm wrapped and his face carrying the tight expression of a man managing pain he had decided not to mention. Elder Miriam. Garrick, who had positioned himself at the far end of the table with the practiced neutrality of someone who attended meetings to find out what they were owed. And Orianthy. Standing to the side, not at the table, which was her choice. She had not been invited to sit and had not asked to, had simply taken a position against the wall where she could see everyone and be seen by everyone and where the distance made it clear that she was present by sufferance rather than inclusion. Silas had put her there deliberately. He was not entirely sure why. He laid it out simply. The module, its capabilities, what Harland believed it could do. The facility, its state, what it contained. The fact that White City had been there recently, the open door, the disturbed dust, and what that implied about the timeline they were working against. Nobody interrupted. That was new. 3 weeks ago this room interrupted constantly. Now it listened, because the people in it had learned that interrupting was what you did when you thought you had time. When he finished, Garrick spoke first. "What's the play?" he said. His voice was even. He was not asking because he didn't know. He was asking to establish what his cooperation would cost. "We stop reacting," Silas said. The room was quiet. "Every decision we've made since the first attack has been a response," he said. "They hit. We repair. They probe. We fortify. They send a mech. We survive it and rebuild." He looked around the table. "That's not a strategy. That's a longer way of losing." Thomas leaned forward. "You're talking about going after them." "I'm talking about going after the mechs," Silas said. "Not Fraction X. Not White City. The mechs. Specifically, finding one that's isolated, using the module to attempt control, and if it works, using what we learn to change what's possible." He paused. "We stop being the people who absorb the next attack. We become the people who decide where the next attack happens and what it costs." Harland was nodding slowly, the nod of a man whose thinking had already arrived at this destination and was relieved someone had said it out loud. "The module's designed for exactly this," he said. "Interface, override, command. That's what it was built for. Whether it still works at full capacity after however many years underground, he tilted his head, we don't know until we try. Kala's arms were crossed. What's the failure mode? She said. Harland looked at her. The mech doesn't respond to the override and we've announced ourselves to whatever's controlling it. Or, Kala said, the mech responds partially. Enough to think we have it and not enough to actually have it. Harland nodded. That too. Or, said Orianthe from the wall. Everyone looked at her. She had not spoken since they entered the room. She spoke now with the measured quietness of someone choosing words that could not be taken back. Or it responds fully, she said. And something else responds with it. The room absorbed this. Silas looked at her. What do you mean? She met his gaze. The mechs aren't individual units, she said. Not entirely. They were designed with a network architecture, each one aware of the others, sharing positional data, sharing threat assessment. She paused. If you establish a control link with one of them, the others will know. How do you know that? Thomas said. His voice was not hostile. Just precise. Orianthe looked at him. The same way I know everything else, she said. And she did not elaborate. The silence that followed had a specific quality, the silence of a room that has just received information it needed and is now sitting with the implications of where that information came from. Silas watched Thomas's face. Watched Kala's. Watched Gerrick at the far end of the table, who was watching Orianthe with the expression of a man recalculating. Then Miriam said, quietly, it changes the risk. It doesn't change the necessity. Silas looked at her. She held his gaze. If we don't move, White City does, she said. And they have more resources and more time and the same information we have plus whatever they found when they were at that facility before us. She folded her hands on the table. Moving first is the only advantage we have. We use it or we don't. Gerrick shifted in his chair. His price was coming. Silas could feel it the way you feel weather. My people, Gerrick said. If this works, if you get control of a mech and you use it, I want operational input on how it's deployed. Not consultation. Input. He looked at Silas. That was the arrangement. Silas looked at him for a moment. That was part of the arrangement, he said. The part we agreed to was your people positioned where it matters. He kept his voice even. Operational decisions stay here. Gerrick's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. He leaned back slightly. We'll revisit that, he said. We will, Silas agreed. After. It was not a concession. It was a postponement, and both men knew the difference, and neither of them pressed it further because this was not the moment and both of them were capable of identifying the moment. The room moved to logistics after that, deployment options, approach routes, the question of team composition. Silas let Kala and Harland drive it. He listened and contributed and made the decisions that needed making, and all the while he was thinking about something else. He was thinking about Trapper. Trapper was not in this room. Silas had not invited him. He had made that decision this morning, quickly, in the same internal space where he made all the decisions he didn't want to examine too closely. The reasoning was sound. Trapper's skills were defensive, his value was in protection of the village. The infiltration team needed different capabilities for this particular mission. The reasoning was sound, and it was also true that Trapper had been asking questions since the return from the facility. Careful questions, specific questions, the questions of a man building a picture from details. Questions about Orianthe specifically. About the hatch that wasn't on the schematics. About how the door had been open. Trapper was good at his job. His job, at its core, was threat assessment. And Silas had watched him, quietly and without announcement, beginning to assess a threat that was inside the wire. Leaving him out of this room was not purely a tactical decision. Silas knew that. He carried it the same way he carried everything, forward, without setting it down, with the full knowledge that the cost of it would come due eventually. He would deal with it then. They had the shape of a plan by the time the light outside had shifted from morning to midday. 3 days to prepare. A team of 6, Silas, Kala, Harland, 2 of Kala's infiltration specialists, and Orianthe. Moving south and east, toward the areas where the mech activity had been concentrated, looking for a unit that was isolated from the main pattern. Attempt contact via the module at range first. Approach only if the contact held. Clean. Specific. The kind of plan that would survive first contact or would need to be abandoned entirely. Silas looked around the room when it was done. "We've been the village that survives," he said. "That's what we've been since the beginning. Survive the attack, rebuild, survive the next one." He looked at each of them. "That ends here. We don't survive the next one. We make sure there isn't one." Nobody spoke. He had not expected them to. What he had said was not a rallying cry. It was a statement of fact, delivered to people who were tired enough to hear facts clearly and frightened enough to need them. The room began to move. He found Trapper at the eastern wall, where he spent most of his time now, watching the tree line, the same patient vigilance that had kept him alive in more places than Silas knew about. He did not turn when Silas approached. He had heard him coming. "I need you here," Silas said. "When we go out. Rustbrook needs its best eyes on the perimeter." Trapper was quiet for a moment. He kept looking at the tree line. "You need me here," he said. "Or you need me not there." Silas said nothing. Trapper turned then. He looked at Silas with the expression of a man who had done threat assessment for long enough to apply it to conversations as readily as terrain. "I've been watching her," Trapper said. "Since we got back. The way she moves. The things she knows." He paused. "You know what I think." "I know what you think," Silas said. "And you're taking her anyway." "Yes." Trapper looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at the tree line. "All right," he said. His voice was flat. Not angry. Something worse than angry, the tone of a man who has made his assessment and delivered it and been heard and overruled, and who will now wait to find out which of them was right. Silas stood there a moment longer. "I hear you," he said. Trapper said nothing. Silas turned and walked back toward the village and felt the specific weight of a decision made for the right reasons that had cost something real. Trapper's trust was not broken. Not yet. But it had been handled, the way you handled something when you needed it to hold and weren't entirely sure it would, and handling things was not the same as keeping them whole. He had 3 days. He went to find Harland. That night, late, when the village had gone to whatever passed for quiet, Silas stood at the gate and looked south. Somewhere out there, in the dark, the mechs moved through patterns that no one fully understood yet. Autonomous. Networked. Aware of each other in ways that Orianthe had described with the specific knowledge of someone who had not learned it from a manual. He thought about what she had said. If you establish a control link with one of them, the others will know. He thought about the door that was already open. He thought about a mission that had succeeded completely, cleanly, without a single unexpected obstacle except for the turrets which had been expected and the near miss on Harland's arm which was the acceptable cost of acceptable risk. Too clean, he thought. Still. But moving was the only alternative to waiting, and waiting was the arithmetic of delay, and the arithmetic of delay ended the same way for Rustbrook that it ended for every place that had run out of walls to rebuild. He turned back toward the village. 3 days. He would know something in 3 days that he didn't know now, and whatever it was, it would be more than he had tonight. It would have to be.